The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Good day and welcome to today's LawCast. I'm Ken Lammers, your host, and what we're going to talk about today is probably the second most prevalent crime that, at least in my area, that criminal defense attorneys deal with. The first would be all the drug-related crimes, but I'm going to skip over those for today. What I'm going to talk about today is basically an outline of what, under Virginia statute and Virginia common law, what larceny is and how it's changed over the years. So, what you first have to understand is that in Virginia, we don't have any of these modern, newfangled, penal code thingies, which they talk about in law school, which is kind of a rude shock when you get out into the real world and start practicing, when there's no model penal code type system in Virginia, and you have to actually go look things up in the common law. But there are helpful books out there and everything. Matter of fact, since basically after your first year of practice, you really don't have time to look all these things up again, you get the cheat books. And the one that is probably the most useful right here is Criminal Offenses and Defenses in Virginia by Roger Groot. Now, unfortunately, Professor Groot, who was a really good professor, I had 2 classes with him at Washington Lee, and he passed away earlier this year. So I'm not sure who's going to continue this book, or if it will be continued, or in the future what its quality level will be. But for now, at least, it is the book in Virginia about criminal offenses and defenses. It's a kind of basic book, but it's really good. Now, looking in this book under larcenies, it goes down and it breaks down what the definition of a larceny is. And in Virginia, the definition of a larceny is the wrongful or fraudulent taking of personal goods of some intrinsic value belonging to another without his assent and with the intention to deprive the owner thereof permanently. So, this breaks down into a number of elements. Taking, which is broken down into caption and asportation, which basically means picking it up and moving it. Movement, asportation can be very minor. It can be a couple inches if you went to snatch something and they grabbed you right after you snatched it, or right as you were snatching it. A minor movement qualifies as asportation, and the caption is the taking of. Well, beyond that, there's personal items. It's got to be personality. I guess under the common law, you can't steal realty. I'm sure that there's some exceptions to that, but basically you can't commit larceny with realty. And, at least that's my vague understanding of it. I've never seen anybody charged with larceny of realty. Maybe it can be done, but I think that it was forbidden under the common law. It has to have some sort of value. Well, I'm here to tell you this. Everything is going to be found to have value in a courtroom. I've never been in a courtroom where even the most worthless thing hasn't been found to have value. You steal a pebble from somebody's garden, which they painted blue and put there, it may be worth 1/10 of a cent. Well, that's value, and you can be convicted of petty larceny of that. Maybe not grand larceny, but you can be convicted of petty larceny on that. So taking just about anything can get you a petty larceny conviction. Property of another. Well, obviously you can't steal your own property. That wouldn't make any sense. But it also covers things like joint bank accounts. You can't steal from a joint bank account because you are a signator. You're allowed to take things out of the joint bank account, even if the other person thought you wouldn't. You can take it out because you're a joint tenant, joint cosigner, whatever. You can take things out of that account. And also falls under this, if it's lost or abandoned, well then you can't be found to have taken something belonging to another. So if you find that pot of gold at the end of in the middle of the woods, you're good to go. Well, especially if it's basically been buried for 10,000 years or whatever. Okay, with intent to permanently deprive. Now, this is, at least theoretically, the trickiest part of proving larceny. Now, I mean, because it's almost always something that has to be inferred. Now, of course, you can get your basic guy who says, yes, I was stealing it, officer, and you do quite often get those. But outside of that person, you've got the guy who's running out the door after he snatched the sweater. Well, you can pretty much infer what he was trying to do. But under Virginia law, there's also an inference if you conceal something. So if you pick it up and stick it in your pocket, you are assumed to be stealing that item. As well, there's an inference that you stole and intended to steal an item if you're found in recent possession of it. And I say recent because I know there's at least one case out there that says 4.5 weeks is recent. Doesn't sound really all that recent to me, but it was upheld in the Court of Appeals, so 4.5 weeks is recent. Okay, so now we know basically what a larceny is. And that's, anyone who's had criminal law in law school gets that. That's pretty basic common law definition of larceny. I know that under the penal codes, model penal codes, and penal codes is adopted in, pretty much every state outside of Virginia, this has all been changed, or has probably been changed to some theft, which overarches everything and puts it all together and has elements in the code. Well, we wouldn't do that here in Virginia. As a matter of fact, the one time I did suggest to someone that a model penal code type's adoption might be good for Virginia, I got called a liberal for that. And in case y'all don't know it, being called a liberal in Virginia is, them is fighting words. And if it wasn't a friend of mine, I probably would have taken him out back and we'd have had a duel. But, which I think may still be legal in Virginia. I have to check on that. Anyway, so we know what the common law is. The question then becomes, well, what's in the statute? Why do we have statutes? The statutes lay out two things, basically. They define the differences between petty larcenies and felonies, grand larcenies, and they lay out the punishment. And then they all lay out exceptions and inclusions that wouldn't have been under common law, that sort of thing, but we'll get into that in a little bit more in a bit. So, as I may have mentioned previously, I have a book, an 1870s statute book. And I looked up in the 1870s statute book what's there. And the statute that lays out what's a grand larceny and what's a petty larceny and lays out the punishment is one single statute. Now, in the modern day, the least number of statutes I can find which cover that are 4 statutes, and they are Virginia Code Section 18.2-95 for grand larcenies, Virginia Code Section 18.2-96 for petty larcenies, Virginia Code Section 18.2-104 for petty larcenies, and Virginia Section 18.2-97 for critters, for animals. Now, let me talk to you about what's in the 1870 statute. The 1870 statute says that if you steal something directly from a person and that item is worth more than $5, it's a grand larceny. And that grand larceny carries a punishment from 5 to 10 years. It then goes on further. If you steal something that's worth more than $50, but you don't steal it directly from a person, then the punishment is 3 to 10 years. If you steal a horse, mule, or jackass, the punishment is 3 to 18 years. So those are your grand larcenies. That's where your grand larcenies are laid out. Now, the petty larceny is what doesn't fit under those categories, and the possible punishment for that is jail up to a year or stripes. I think we all have a pretty good idea what's meant by stripes. We don't do that anymore in Virginia. Surprising. It was traditional. I'm surprised we don't do it anymore, but we don't. So, these all transferred into the modern era. And I looked up on a site called eh.net how much these monetary amounts would amount to in modern times. And in 1870, $5 stolen from a person would be approximately the equivalent of $75 in the modern era. Now, in eh.net, they give you 5 possible current values. I don't count the 2 highest ones because they were just way out of the ballpark. And the low ones, I just kind of rounded up to the nearest $5. So $75 is about what stealing from a person would be in the modern times. For stealing not directly from a person, $50 is equal to, in modern times, $725. So that's where, if things had carried on at the same level, we'd be right now with our larcenies. However, that's not what happened. And I'll tell you, here's from Virginia Code section 18.2-95. What do you have to steal from a person in the modern era to get the same punishment you got for stealing from a person in 1870 for $5? $5. So if you steal $5 in modern money from a person, you steal that crummy knockoff piece of crud purse that the girl bought at a street corner outside Walmart. Well, that's a grand larceny, purse snatch. $5 in modern times. Let's put that in perspective. $5 in modern times as compared to $5 in 1870s is 1/15 of the value of what it was in 1870. So, if you steal $5 in modern time, you're stealing something that would be infinitely of less value. Well, not infinitely, but greatly less in value than what the item would have been in 1870. Say in 1870 you'd have to snatch a necklace of pearls. Nowadays, like I say, a knockoff purse. A terrible $10 Walmart watch. That sort of thing gets you a grand larceny. Now, so surely stealing something not directly from a person, the amount actually went higher. And yes, it did. Instead of the $50 in 1870 money, in the modern era, in order to be convicted of a grand larceny, you have to steal something worth $200. Yes, you heard me right. $200 is a grand larceny in Virginia. Comparative to the value of in the statute in 1870, it is less than a third of what the 1870 value was. So, to say that the modern statutes haven't exactly kept up would be an understatement. Anyway, now, those weren't the only grand larcenies. There's also larceny of certain animals and poultry. So it's still illegal to steal critters. Any person who shall be guilty of the larceny of a dog, horse, pony, mule, cow, steer, bull, or calf shall be guilty of a Class 5 felony. And any person who shall be guilty of the larceny of any poultry of the value of $5 or more, but of the value of less than $200, or of a sheep, lamb, swine, or goat of the value of less than $200 shall be guilty of a Class 6 felony. So, what that's saying is, if you steal a dog or beef, you have committed a felony where you can get punished up to 10 years. If you steal a pig or poultry, you have committed a felony which can get you up to 5 years. And surely, you say to me, people do not charge grand larceny for stealing a dog. I've had two grand larceny cases for the theft of a dog, and we're not talking, His Majesty Ferdinand the 17th prize chow show dog. No, we're talking, Floppy the mutt, who the only two people who really care about this dog in the entire world are the person who owns it and the person who stole it. And they will charge each other for grand larceny for taking a daggone thing. And I like my dogs a lot. Somebody stole my dogs, I might want them charged with grand larceny too. But it does strike me as kind of a little overboard. Anyway, so those are the grand larcenies. Now we've changed the petty larcenies as well in Virginia. And by the way, that's 18.2-97 for larceny of animals and poultry. Under 18.2-96 and 18.2-104, we lay out a punishment for all other petty larcenies. And the petty larcenies are punished by up to a year in jail and up to $2,500 in fine. However, that's what's under 18.2-96. And 18.2-104, they go back in again, and they somewhat contradict each other, but I guess it's a more specific statute, so therefore it would be the one you would apply. In 18.2-104, the second time it's a petty larceny, it is a 30-day to a year penalty. And the third time, or any subsequent time that it's a petty larceny, it is a felony, a Class 6 felony carrying up to 5 years imprisonment. So any third theft is automatically a felony. So, by the way, if one of your priors is a grand larceny and one of your priors is a petty larceny and you steal a 5-cent piece of gum, theft of that 5-cent piece of gum is still a petty larceny third, felony petty larceny. It is, and that's the way it is in Virginia. So now we've laid out the framework of what composes a petty larceny and a felony larceny, grand larceny in Virginia. Let's go over a little bit of the different things that are out there kind of as add-ons, okay? First thing I'm going to go over is something that was in the 1870 statutes and is still in the statutes. It is a larceny of things fixed to a freehold. And it is word for word the same thing in the modern statute. As a matter of fact, the modern statute is 18.2-99, and both of them read as such. Things which savor of the realty, and are at the time they are taken part of the freehold, whether they be of the substance or produce thereof, or affixed thereto, shall be deemed goods and chattels, of which larceny may be committed, although there is no interval between the severing and taking away. Passes into law exactly the same way today. Never seen it applied anywhere, but basically, if you steal somebody's sod from their front yard, you've committed larceny. You steal somebody's house from their yard, from their realty, you committed larceny. Kind of makes sense, but like I said before, I think that under the common law, that wasn't, you couldn't steal realty, or you couldn't commit larceny with realty. And I don't know how long that's been the law since 1870 at least. I don't know how long it had existed prior to that. I don't have any statute books prior to 1870. But moving on, okay, let's talk about the shoplifting statutes. And Virginia has, under 18.2-103, they have the concealment statute. And this statute has, if you conceal something, or you change the tags, or move it from one bin to another so that it looks like it's cheaper, or you help someone who's doing such a thing, for instance, you're the decoy, then you are presumed to be committing a larceny. The mere concealment is enough to presume guilt. And Obviously, that's an unconstitutional standard. It assumes guilt. If it was argued before a jury, the actual jury instruction would say you may infer from the fact that he took and stuffed, 5 packages of socks down his pants that he was going to steal them. It won't say you must or you must presume. That's just in the statute. Okay, so we move on from there. The 18.2-105.1. Now that's not exact. It's not exactly laying out what a theft or stealing or larceny is. This is a statute that's something that I think we all should probably know about if we're practicing law in Virginia. Under this statute, the employees, manager, owner of a store can hold a private citizen for 1 hour under color of law if they have proper cause, 1 hour or until the police arrive. That's an interesting statute, and we all know that store security does that sort of thing. They are an interesting group of fellows. And then finally, there's 18.2-94, burglarious tools, or for those of you in the rest of the world where you speak English, burglary tools. We in Virginia, of course, being who we are, we say burglarious. No idea why, but we do. Now, this statute reads, it's 18.2-94, and it reads as such. If any person have in his possession any tools, implements, or outfit with intent to commit burglary, robbery, or larceny, upon conviction thereof, he shall be guilty of a Class 5 felony, up to 5 years. The possession of such burglarious tools, implements, or outfit by any person other than the licensed dealer shall be prima facie evidence of an intent to commit burglary, robbery, or larceny. So, what does that mean? Again, you get an unconstitutional assumption of guilt, which would be changed in jury instructions to you may infer from the fact that he had burglarious tools or larceny tool that he intended to commit larceny. What exactly does that mean? Well, I'm here to tell you. The reading that I've seen prosecutors give it and judges agree with over and over again basically is that every single thing you own in your entire life is a larceny tool. If someone could come up with a creative way to use it, it is a larceny tool if it could possibly be used. Now, the argument you see most often in furtherance of this is the Commonwealth attorneys citing to a case, and I don't have the case law right here with me, but there's a case where a kid was using his pants to shoplift. And they argue that because he was using his pants is a general use item, therefore a general use item can be, you can be convicted of burglarious tools or larceny tools for a general use item because this kid was using his pants to steal. What they give the short shrift to or try to avoid in that argument is the fact that the kid had cut the bottom of the pockets out in his pants and had tied the bottom of his pants leg so that he could grab something, stick it in his pocket, let it drop to the bottom of his pants, and it would stay there. It was a specific tool designed for a specific purpose, or a specific outfit designed for a specific purpose, whichever you want. But I've argued that until I'm blue in the face more than a couple times, and it ends up being the judges just convict on these. They don't really put a whole lot of thought into it. They just convict on it. This is a charge that's usually pled away. It's usually one of those things where, okay, I'll get rid of this. We'll drop the burglarious tools. We'll drop the petty larceny. We'll drop this. If he pleads guilty to the grand larceny and the drug possession. Well, sure, because he's actually guilty of the grand larceny and the drug possession, so you take that. But on the few times I've had to argue it, the specific tool argument just gets shot out of the water or not really paid too much attention to. However, I don't think the prosecutors really believe it as they put it out either, because I've never seen anyone charged with burglarious tools, larceny tools, for having stuck something in their pocket for wearing pants, or for having stuck something in their coat, which would be, under that definition, a burglarious tool. They get charged with concealment, they get charged with petty larceny, they don't get charged with burglarious tools for sticking something in their pockets. The way that this comes into the court most of the time as a larceny tool are bags. Every time you walk into a store with a bag, whether you got it at a different store or that store or whatever, you are at that moment presumed to be about to commit larceny. You are. That's where it is. Okay? So, because under this statute, because those bags are tools. They are tools which can be used to steal. My argument is that they're general items. They're not specific tools. Therefore, they shouldn't fall under the statute. Someday, I will win that argument. God willing. But it never works. So, invariably, somebody shoplifts, sticks it in a bag rather than sticking it in their pocket. And because they stick it in the bag rather than sticking it in their pocket, they get charged with burglarious tools. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what they get charged with. Just remember, folks, every time you walk into a store with a bag in your hand, or a purse, or anything else where you could stick something into it, you are presumed to be about to commit larceny at that store. Now, wonderful statute. Okay, so next we go on to papers and credit cards and that sort of thing. And thinking back to law school, these were called chooses in action, something along those lines. Basically, it's an item which unto itself is not of great value, but represents and brings access to something such as a bank account or a credit line, which is of great value. Prior to statutory additions to the law, the fact that you had these just meant you got convicted of a petty larceny. It didn't mean you get convicted of a grand larceny. You get convicted of having the paper. You stole the paper. They might be $50,000 bearer bonds, but you had stolen the paper, not the money they represented. And on the other hand, the credit card, you had stolen the piece of plastic. So you'd get petty larceny rather than a grand larceny. That's what you end up with. However, they went back in and changed that. 18.2-98 changes, it makes banknotes, checks, and other writings on paper worth the value on their face rather than the paper they're made of. So if it's a $50,000 bearer bond, you're on the hook for $50,000. If it's a check and somebody actually wrote a number into it prior to you stealing it, then it's worth that amount. If nobody's written anything on it, well, then it's worth the paper. It's the paper and the ink, I guess. A petty larceny again. And also, there's a statute which makes it a felony to steal credit cards. Class 5 felony to up to 10 years if you steal a credit card. So there's where that stands. Now, there are specific types of larceny, actually they stand alone as their own kind of crime, or used to. Embezzlement. Under Virginia law, embezzlement is stealing from your boss. Although, I think it can be, pretty much anyone you have a fiduciary relationship with, but usually it's stealing from your boss. You're the cashier at the grocery store. You take $20 a night out of your cash register. You work at the 7-Eleven. You steal, slushies every night before you go home. That's embezzlement. And we find and it's supposed to be punished like grand larceny, up to 20 years. So we find that embezzlement, proof of embezzlement shall be sufficient to sustain the charge of larceny. It didn't used to be that way in Virginia. used to have to prove embezzlement and larceny to prove larceny. You had to prove that extra element for embezzlement. Well, there was somebody that got convicted of larceny and had actually done an embezzlement, took it up in the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals actually reversed it. Well, our helpful, General Assembly went back in and changed the law, so now embezzlement is actually a larceny. It's not just an embezzlement. So if you can prove it, it's a larceny. And finally, at the very end, there are the catch-alls. These are not actually, well, they're somewhat larcenies, but they are things that don't fit exactly. What if you intend to return the item? Basically, they're failure to return statutes. And the first of these is Virginia Code Section 18.2-117. If a bailee fails to return a vehicle or an animal within 5 days of when it was due, he is presumed to have stolen it. Yes, again, we have a presumption that you're going to you've stolen something. Of course, as again, like I said, if it went to a jury instruction, it would be you may infer from the fact that he didn't return it within the 5 days that he intended to steal it. But you get the presumption. What you see this mostly used for is rental car agencies. They get somebody rents the car, doesn't return it on time, and they charge them under this statute. Done all the time, and usually the rental car agency is trying to get his car back and trying to get paid for the amount of time the rent would have been. They're not really all that hot about getting somebody a felony charge, but they want their stuff back. Okay. Now, a lot of times you can plead those down to pay larcenies or even have them go away. Then there's the next charge, unauthorized use, 18.2-102. This is when you take a vehicle or an animal with the intent to temporarily deprive its owner but return it later. If it's less than if the item taken is less than $200, it's worth less than $200. It's a Class 1 misdemeanor. If the item taken is more than $200, it's a Class 6 felony, up to 5 years in jail. This is something you see a lot of times where somebody has. It's almost always cars that you see this with, and it's somebody who's got a drug addict, in their family or immediate friends or boyfriend or husband or whatever, and that person takes the vehicle and either uses it to pay for drug debt or to pay to get drugs, or rents it out to somebody else, or just takes it and doesn't come back. Again, this is much like the way when the car dealerships or car rental places are trying to do. It's usually a family member who wants his car back, calls the police and says, hey, Bobby's got my car and I want it back. Well, he ends up with a charge of unauthorized use. Back in court, a lot of times these get settled out again, like I said, to misdemeanors or, go away altogether once the person's got their stuff back, because they really usually don't want to prosecute their family member. Sometimes, though, you get a prosecutor who's stubborn who's going to go forward on these things. And finally, there is 18.2-102.2, unauthorized use of milk crates. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you take a milk crate without written consent of the company that owns it, you are guilty of violating this statute. And it's a Class 4 misdemeanor, but so you'd only get a fine, but still, you are guilty of violating this statute. And I raise this point because, well, once upon a time I lived in a dorm room, and I remember lots of milk crates being around. Now, I don't know if they still are. I don't even know if they use milk crates anymore. But just in case, for those of you who live in dorm rooms, I thought you might want the heads up. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. I think I've butchered the law enough. And my dog is getting nervous over here because he wants to take his evening walk. So I'm going to call it quits. Remember, as I've always said, if you're interested in any of this, go do the research yourself, because I surely did not do enough research for your case in particular. So don't be quoting me to a judge. And I hope some of this was useful, and I hope some of it was entertaining. And I hope you'll tune in next time I do one of these. Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen. Spot. You troublemaker, you. Okay, that's enough, boy. There you go.